What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and I'm back on camera, back on the couch this week so that I can share some Dominaria brews with you. And I see you there in the back. Yeah, we've only seen about half the set so far, but that half that we have seen includes most of the rares and mythics and like all of the different themes that are present in the set. So I do think it's important that we go ahead and get like a head start on brewing for the next standard, because we know what most of the cards that are important are going to be anyway, and we might as well go ahead and identify the important interactions, not only between the different cards in Dominaria with themselves, but also the cards in Dominaria with the cards that are already in standard, and how these different decks will play against one another. So I do think it's cool to go ahead and start brewing things up and sort of sharing my findings with you guys, and then we can talk it out in the comments section. So I think this is an important thought experiment, even though we haven't seen the entire set yet. If we go ahead and get started brewing, we can at least learn to identify what the decks need most and hope that we get those pieces. But here's the thing though, in the case of blue-red wizards, I really don't think this deck needs too many more pieces outside of what we've already seen to be a functioning deck. So, like I said, today we're going to give you 2.5 lists. You'll see what I mean by half a little bit later on, but I'm going to give you a competitive list and a budget list and a sort of more off-the-wall idea that you can try if you want to. But we're going to go ahead and get started with what I think the competitive wizards list looks like with what we know so far. Now, for both the budget and competitive decks I'm going to show you, it really all starts with 4 copies of Odalisque the Cinder Wind. In case you haven't seen Odalisque yet, she is a spell-based aggro deck's dream top-end card. You know, 3 mana, not too much to ask. Flying, the haste is really relevant, and she gives all your wizards, and herself for that matter, a form of like watered-down prowess. Instead of non-creature spells, it's just instants and sorceries, but we'll definitely take that. Now, something cool about Odalisque is even though she's a little fragile, you know, she's got 2 toughness, she can get killed by shock or magma spray, but if they do target her with those spells, you can always play a spell in response, boost her toughness up past shock. And same thing works with lightning strike or a braid, given that you have enough spells and mana to boost her toughness at instant speed. So that's really important to remember too. You can protect her in that way, and she's going to need protecting. But if you can't untap with her, like on turn 4, and you got all your mana available and a couple of spells still left in your hand, she can do some serious damage just by herself. But if there's even like 1 or 2 other wizards on the battlefield, usually GG, you know, because you're just dealing crazy amounts of damage, and usually the spells you're casting are removal that are either going to get their creatures out of the way, or they're going to just like deal damage straight to the dome and add to the damage you're doing with the creatures. So there are some turn 4s where it's very easy to output crazy amounts of damage with an Odalisque on the board. But honestly, I don't necessarily want to wait until turn 4 to do all that cool stuff. I mean, she's going to be swinging on turn 3, and honestly, if we can get 1 trigger from Odalisque to go off on turn 3, we can be really, really happy with that. So, all that said, I'm going to also play 4 whole copies of Mox Amber. Now, this isn't the build for Mox Amber, I don't think. There's another build or 2 that I think is the right way to build with Mox Amber, but that doesn't stop other decks from playing the card. Again, if we can drop Odalisque turn 3 and then Mox into a 1-drop creature, or preferably a spell like Shock or Opt or something, that's awesome. You know, not only are we swinging for 3 with haste with Odalisque, but we're also boosting any other dudes that we happen to have out. So again, I would rather go ahead and start proccing her as quickly as possible, and Mox helps us do that. So that's one reason to play it. And a lot of people I've seen brewing with this card put 3 copies of Mox Amber in. I'm actually going with all 4 copies for a couple of different reasons. But the main reason that we're doing it is so that we have the outside chance, however edge it might be, of going Odalisque on turn 3, double Mox. And yeah, you'll have to get rid of one of the Mox in, absolutely, but you'll still have 2 extra mana on turn 3 that you shouldn't have access to, which is great. You can also do this after a turn 2 legend sometimes. Again, outside chance, but having a whole extra 2 mana on turn 2 is ridiculous. Decks would kill for that, even if they have to sacrifice one of their lands, essentially. So if we do go, you know, 3-drop into double Mox, that's still crazy. We can get a 1-drop creature and a 1-drop spell, and maybe even 2 1-drop spells, which would be really great after an Odalisque on turn 3. And even if we draw a Mox on turn 5 or 6, after we already have a Mox Amber out, that's fine. You know, we can just tap the one that's already out for mana, and then play the second one, get rid of the first, and tap it for mana. So I'm not too worried about playing all 4 copies. I just think there's too many good things about playing 4 that I'm going to sort of ignore the legendary rule here. But obviously we have to have more legends than just Untitled if we're going to actually make Mox Amber work as often as possible. And those legends need to be as cheap as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is play 3 copies of Baral in the 2-drop slot, which I really wrestled with the decision to do for a while. But I think it works out in the end. Now, Baral doesn't look like the most aggressive card in the entire world, but it is worth noting that he'll get power and toughness boosts whenever you play a spell when you have an Untitled out. So he will get bigger if you can play a spell or two, and he makes those spells a little cheaper to cast. It's also worth noting, by the way, that Baral gets way better after sideboards, usually, because we're packing a lot of counter spells in the sideboard. I think the deck is a little bit too aggressive to have a bunch of counters in the main, but we want to have negates and stuff like that in the board, so Baral just instantly gets way better game 2 and 3. Now this next card's going to look a little bit weird, but bear with me, I actually think this is the right choice. I needed another cheap 2-mana legend to make Mox Amber work as often as possible. Really needed to get to at least 9 of these so that we'd have a decent chance of getting Mox Amber to work by turn 3. So here's the thing, there is another 2-mana wizard legend in Dominaria, but it doesn't really go well with the rest of what we're trying to do. I'll get to him a little bit later when I talk about that half a deck that I alluded to earlier, but I don't think he's great for this deck. So instead, I wanted something that fit with the aggressive theme of the deck while still being a cheap legend to proc Mox Amber. So what we ended up on here was 2 copies of Kari Zev. Again, I know it looks weird, but here's the thing, we're still playing 16 wizards in the deck, which is plenty of wizards. This is the only non-wizard creature. It's really just there to make Mox Amber as consistent as possible, but there's still crazy stuff you can do. Turn 2 Kari Zev into Mox Amber into another 1-drop creature or a shock is just, that's pretty unbelievable. So again, even though it's not a wizard, it opens us up to these insane plays that we wouldn't otherwise have, and I'll take it, especially considering the deck is trying to be as aggressive as possible. So Kari Zev's really good at that, and I think she's good enough for this deck if we're looking for another cheap legend that's also aggressive enough for us. Now, at the very, very top end of the curve in this deck, we're going to play 2 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance. I also kind of sat on the fence about this decision for a few days before I realized Chandra's just one of the best cards in the format. I mean, there's no reason for us not to play Chandra. She also helps, turn on Mox Amber, which is really important, especially considering you can go turn 3 Chandra after a turn 2 legend. That's awesome to be able to do. You can also play Chandra, play Mox Amber, and then draw a card with Chandra, and if it's a 1-mana card, you get to play it with your Mox Amber. Or if you just already have another 1-mana card in your hand, you get to play it with your Mox Amber. That's really cool. You can also, by the way, play Chandra, ramp with Chandra, and have an extra mana with your Mox Amber, so Chandra effectively only cost you 1 mana on that turn. There are just a lot of cool interactions with Chandra in the deck, but of course, Chandra doesn't even have to have interactions. She's just that good, She's late game card draw for us. The deck needs that so it doesn't run out of gas, Turns where we can effectively draw 2 spells in the same turn because we have a Chandra out are amazing. Chandra's great, she's good with Mox Amber, and she's a really good late game plan for us too. But we got to play some other wizards in the deck. I told you there were 16, and I've only covered like 7. So let me go ahead and show you the rest of the whiz kids in the deck. Here they are. We got 4 copies of Soulscar Mage, 2 copies of Siren Stormtamer, and 3 copies of Gitu Lava Runner. Well, Soulscar Mage is just crazy. This version of the deck has like 16 different instants and sorceries, plus a bunch of other non-creature spells like Mox Amber and Chandra that can get its prowess to go off. But even cooler than that, if we have an Untitled out, we effectively get 2 prowess triggers on this whenever we cast a spell. And we've got a buttload of burn in this deck to make this really awesome against stuff like, Hazoret and Ronus that would normally have indestructible. So Soulscar Mage just literally does it all. And it's awesome to have, 1-drop red creatures like this and Lava Runner to a certain extent. But it's great to have these 1-drop red creatures just in case we can go like turn 2 Kari Zev or turn 3 Untitled into Mox Amber. This gives us something to use with that, or to play with that mana. So that's a really important aspect of these 1-drops too. As far as Lava Runner goes, 16 spells makes it relatively easy to get the spell mastery on this, and it's great on turn 4, surprisingly. You go Untitled turn 3. Well, turn 4, you can often empty your hand by playing like get to Lava Runner into a couple of spells, or even just one spell. That way, you have a haste Lava Runner with the power boost, and Odalise gives it a power boost too, and, you know, it swings in that turn. So, it's just, Lava Runner can actually be really good pressure, either, you know, turn 4, or sometimes even as early as turn 3. So, you know, you can double spell on turn 2 in this deck relatively easily, because we have, you know, Opt and Shock in the deck. So it's not uncommon for Spell Mastery to be on by turn 3 for Lava Runner, and that's when especially multiple Lava Runner starts can be fantastic. And Siren Storm Tamer is in there as another great one-drop creature. You know, we go Brawl into Mox Amber on turn 2, we can play a Storm Tamer. Same thing with Odalise. Odalise on turn 3 into Mox Amber gets us Siren Storm Tamer if we want it. This is great, too, to protect legends that we want to protect. Odalise comes to mind, obviously, you know, and it's just good to have a relatively high concentration of one-drop creatures so we can get on the board early. That way, if we do drop a turn 3 Odalise, we get as much power boost on the next turn as possible from playing spells. So, one-drop creatures are important in the first place, and this is a great one-drop wizard. You know, it's got a form of evasion, so once it does start getting boosts from Odalise, it can get through for big chunks of damage depending on how many spells you can actually cast in a turn. So, Storm Tamer is no slouch either. I'm only playing 2 copies, but don't let that fool you. This is an important card. Now, we're playing 16 instants and sorceries in this deck so that we can get Odalise to go off relatively consistently. That's an awful lot of spells. So let me show you all these real quick. We're going to play 4 copies of Opt, 4 copies of Shock, 4 copies of Lightning Strike, and 4 copies of Wizard's Lightning. Well, you know, we got to play the playset of Wizard's Lightning. It's just like one of the most hyped cards in the entire set. And we got some good plays with it. Like, this is the best thing to do with a Mox Amber after a turn 3 Odalise. You know, just play a Lightning Bolt after your Odalise and then send your girls in. That always feels pretty good. And you can even go like turn 1 Soulscar Mage into turn 2 Kari Zev, Mox Amber, Wizard's Lightning, because you have a Soulscar Mage. That's a great play, too. It feels like actually playing Lightning Bolt in Standard, and it does feel just shy of broken. Now, together with Shock and Lightning Strike, that gives us 12 really cheap direct damage spells. That is a lot of reach in what is ostensibly an aggro deck, you know? And these are great almost no matter what stage of the game we're in, whether we're turn 4 or 5, we're using these to help trigger Odalise, or we draw these on turn 7 or 8 to help close the game out because we need that reach. These are just fantastic almost any time. They help blow a hole in the opponent's defenses to help get our guys through, or they just add on, you know, to the damage we're already going to do in combat anyway. So I'm not ashamed of playing 12 burn spells here. I think it's the right play. And of course, there's good old Opt. Good old 1-mana Opt that we can play off of a Mox Amber when we need to, or we can use it to trigger Odalise or other prowess creatures like Soulscar Mage. It's just 1 mana and helps us see all the cards we need to. Gets us to land when we want to, or blast through, you know, at least the top card if it's a land when we don't need land. Just Opt does absolutely everything, and we got to play all 4 copies. Now, as far as this first deck, I'm just going to play 20 lands here because we've got a pretty low curve, obviously. We're trying to get to Chandra way up there, but we do have 4 copies of Mox Amber as this sort of effectively 4 lands, you know, to help us get there. So we get to play a relatively low land count here and still survive really easily. And I think this is right. I don't think I want to play Scavenger Grounds or Field of Ruin or anything like that. I want all the colored mana we can possibly get, if we can help it. Now here's a working sideboard for this first deck, and you'll see a couple of cards here that you may have expected to see in the main deck, but honestly, both Wizard's Retort and Merfolk Trickster are a little bit too slow in the main deck for the aggression that we're trying to pull off. I found that we don't really want to hold up 2 mana for Merfolk Trickster, even on like turn 4 or 5, when you think that you'd want to, but there are decks it's important against, you know, decks with Scarab God, Rekindling Phoenix, Hazaret, that's almost every deck in the format. But against a lot of those decks, we either try to close out the game faster than they can, we can just race them relatively well in most cases, especially decks with the Scarab God that are relatively slow. We race them pretty well, so I'm not actually too worried about a card like Merfolk Trickster that really kind of slows us down in the long run. And same thing with Wizard's Retort, we just don't want to hold up 2 blue mana. That's another thing. Both Trickster and Retort do, in the end, cost us 2 blue mana, and it's actually not super guaranteed that we'll have that very, very early in the game. Like, we can go turn 1 Soulscar, and then have the mana, possibly, for a Wizard's Retort on turn 2, but this is an aggressive deck. I really don't want to hold up mana on turn 2. So, I just don't think that Retort is quite there for what we're trying to do. It's obviously a great card, but I just don't think it quite fits with what we're trying to do in the main. Now, game 2, we may go a little bit more mid-range, and we may be a little bit more concerned with countering spells if we're going against a mid-range deck. So I think Retort has its place, but it's in the 15, not the 60. But I actually think Spell Pierce is subtly one of the best counter spells this deck can actually play. I'm only going to play the 2 copies because it's a little bit narrow, but the situations we need it in, it's really good for. We really don't want to get swept. We especially don't want to get hit by Settle the Wreckage. And Spell Pierce can really help clear up those problems for us on the key turns that we need it to. Turn 4, turn 5, turn 6. Spell Pierce is fantastic against a lot of different sweepers, and it's especially important that we can play it after a Mox Amber. You know, we can drop, say, an Odalise, for instance, and then drop Mox Amber, hold Spell Pierce up. We can't do that with things like Negate, so I think that's really important. Also, peep the Nimble Obstructionist there. I didn't think this was quite good enough for the main deck either, but it's a great sideboard card when they're trying to activate their Scarab God, or even their Hazoret, I guess, but mostly their Scarab God is what you're worried about. So this can take away one activation, and that can sometimes be all you need. You take away their activation and get your own 3/1 flyer that can get bigger whenever you play a spell, and you got an Odalise out. So I like a lot about that, but I'll relegate it to the board, and I'll just make it the 1 copy, because I think it's not as important as it looks at the end of the day. Now, that was the competitive deck, and because of Chandra's and especially Mox Ambers and stuff, the deck is a little north of $200 to pre-order on TCG Player right now. That's not too bad considering the price of some standard decks, but I could understand if that was a little bit steep. I get that. Some of the Mox Amber plays in the deck are absolutely ridiculous and absolutely worth playing the deck for, too. I think there's a lot of power in the way Mox Amber plays with the Wizards deck, but there's definitely a way to build the deck without Mox Amber at all, and in a way, the deck is a little bit more consistent. It gets to play more, creatures. It gets to play more instants and sorceries. That's all the deck wants. So with that said, I'll go ahead and show you the budget deck. Now, as far as what's the same, I'll go ahead and show you that real quick. We're going to still play all 4 copies of Odalise, definitely. We're going to play the 4 copies of Soulscar Mage, and we're also going to play 3 copies of Gittu Lava Runner and 2 Siren Storm Tamer, just like we did in that first deck. None of this changes. I think that these are all great to have. We still need the 1-mana creatures. Even though we're not playing Mox Amber, we still need 1-mana creatures to get on board to help Odalise put as much power on the board as possible when we actually trigger her. So still want all the 1-drops, and these 1-drops are still important for most of the same reasons. Odalise, too, don't have to explain that. This is really the cornerstone of the deck, what it's built around. So we're going to play all 4 copies, even though it's legendary. We want to see it on turn 3 as often as we possibly can, and it's got a huge target on its back. So if they do kill it in one of the myriad ways it can be killed, it's always good to have another one locked and loaded. Now, as far as the spells in the deck, we're still playing the exact same burn suite. We're playing 4 copies of Shock, 4 Lightning Strike, 4 Wizard's Lightning, and we're going to play the 4 Opt as well. Nothing changes here. We've got the exact same spell suite, and we actually get to add a couple of spells. I'll get to those in just a second, but nothing changes here. These cards are still absolutely outrageous, not only for what this deck is trying to do, but just about any deck. Just about any deck. Even Wizard's Lightning in a deck that plays like 8 Wizards, it's probably worth Wizard's Lightning, but we're playing way more Wizards than that, and Wizard's Lightning is an absolutely ridiculous card. But as far as the new stuff in the budget deck, I'll start with 3 copies of Spellweaver Eternal. This thing is like less than 5 cents, like 3 cents, I think, on TCG Player right now. And it's actually really, really good for this deck if you're looking for 2-drops. Just like Soulscar Mage, this is another thing with prowess. So not only when you cast an instant or sorcery will it get the trigger off of Odalise, but it'll also get an extra prowess trigger. And creatures like that are just incredible. So this is actually almost good enough for the non-budget deck, but not quite. I'd still rather try and make Mox Amber work, so I'm playing other 2-drops in that deck. But for a budget deck where we don't have to spend $100 on Moxing, I think that Spellweaver Eternal is the right choice. Now, I'm also going to move in 2 copies of Merfolk Trickster from the competitive deck sideboard. This deck is just by nature a little bit slower. It doesn't have Mox Amber or anything. It's just slightly slower, so we get away with Trickster a little bit more in this deck, plus we lose Chandra, We can't afford to play Chandra, so we lost some removal elements, and this is effectively another removal element to help replace Chandra. I'm not going to feel too bad about playing this in the main deck, honestly, though. It's another body, it's another wizard, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, we also get to add 2 copies of Champion of Wits in this deck. That buffs us up to 20 whole wizards in this deck. That's a good round number, I think, and it doesn't compromise how many instants and sorceries we get to play. We still play 18 instants and sorceries, which is still more, again, than the competitive deck played. So, again, in a way, we're a little bit more focused in this deck. We get to play more wizards and more instants and sorceries. And Champion of Wits is pretty sweet. Again, he's not aggressive enough for the competitive deck. And I really didn't want the curve, the possible curve of turn 2 Baral into turn 3 Champion of Wits. That's just really slow and not good enough for a deck that's trying to be aggressive. So since we don't have that possible curve option in this deck, I think it's a little bit safer to play Champion of Wits, honestly. I know it's kind of weird, but that's my justification for it. And again, we don't have Chandra. That's a card advantage engine that we'd really like to have that we can't afford to play. So this is another way that even without Chandra, we can see more cards. That's important too. It also does other cool stuff too. It gives us a resilient option that we can eternalize later in the game when it dies, and it's actually one of the bigger creatures in the deck after it eternalizes, so that's pretty sweet. And subtle interaction here, it can dump instants and sorceries into the graveyard for Get to Lava Runner, which is actually pretty cool. But we'll finish this one off with the last new card in the budget deck, the 2 copies of Chart of Course that we're porting over from the sideboard of the first deck. You may have noticed I didn't talk about this card when I listed the sideboard in the first deck. I wanted to save it until now. Again, I think that the first deck is just a little bit aggressive to be playing Chart of Course, but in this deck, again, we lose a card advantage option that we really like to play, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. And so this is a great late-game refill or mid-game refill that's flexible. We can play this before combat to help trigger Oddities, or we can play it after combat for really raw card advantage. I like a lot about Chart of Course in this deck, and since we're taking expensive cards out, we're opening up some slots, I think Chart of Course is one of the first cards I'd like to invite in from the board. This card is great. Now in the budget deck, we're going up to 22 lands. We're just adding a basic of each color here. 22 lands I think is right. You'll note that I'm basically valuing a Mox Amber at about half a land. Since we're not playing Mox Amber, we got to go up in lands a little bit, but we don't have to get to Chandra. We don't have a 4, mana card in the deck, so that also helps keep things in check here. I think 22 lands is enough. And here's the sideboard for the budget deck. This is pretty much all the same cards, except you'll note the addition of a Braid. I couldn't find sideboard slots for a Braid in the first deck. You could play it over Unsummon or Nimble Obstructionist if you wanted to. I could see taking both of those out if you wanted, or maybe even Chart of Course for a Braid if artifacts are a serious problem. You're seeing a lot of Godfair's gift decks or whatever. I could see playing, making some room in the board of the first deck for a Braid, but I'll definitely play it here considering we lost a good chunk of our sideboard to the main deck. But again, you'll notice that most of the sideboard looks eerily similar to the first deck. Even if you don't have over $200 for the first deck, this deck is only about $75 after the sideboard. A little bit more manageable, and that's with pre-order prices too, which tend to sometimes be higher. So that's not really that much to pay for what's going to end up being a pretty good deck at F&M. But that last half a deck that I want to go over before we get out of here, or at least start getting out of here, is the Naban deck. Now, I didn't play Naban in either of these decks because he really doesn't work great with almost any of the wizards that we're playing. He does okay with Champion of Wits. That's a pretty good interaction. We're playing Champion of Wits in the second deck, but I just don't think that he's quite there or what we want to be doing. He has the right creature type. That's more or less where it begins and ends in both of these decks with Naban. So even though he would be a great way to make sure that Mox Amber goes off on turn 2, I actually kind of like having Kari Zev because that gives us both a blue and a red legend on turn 2 to help place different spells with Mox Amber. So I'm just not sure that he works in either of these main decks, but there are some really neat things you can do with him. I've already talked about Champion of Wits. That's one cool interaction, but also picture him with Metallic Mimic. Just think about that for a second. Getting an extra counter on all of your wizards would be a pretty dope move as well. But One of the coolest things you can do with Naban is Merfolk. We're already playing Merfolk, obviously. You know, we've got the new 2-mana Merfolk, so we're playing Merfolk. But note that there's also a bunch of really cool Merfolk wizards that apply to Naban in cool ways. You know, here's a couple of them. Obviously, there's Silvergill Adept. Silvergill Adept is pretty great, and it'd be awesome to proc it twice when it entered the battlefield, so there's that. But we also get Water Trap Weaver, which would also be really sweet to basically Panharmonicon with on curve. So I like that. It might actually be worth it. And there's more than that. There's Riverwise Augur is another possible playable. You know, after Silvergill and Water Trap and Merfolk Trickster, the playable Merfolk go downhill. But there are others that you could play if you wanted to. So I really think that a sort of Panharmonicon-esque deck with Naban and Merfolk might be playable, but it seems more niche, more Johnny, more sort of, you know, I don't know, gimmicky. And I just think the two decks I've already shown you are probably going to be stronger. But if you like fun decks, this deck could be fun, especially if you had both Naban and Panharmonicon. I could see that being just all the fun you could ever wish to have. So if you want to try it out, the deck exists. But those are all the cards that I would at least consider here. If I didn't bring up a wizard, I either completely forgot about it, which I didn't, I promise you that, or it's just not good enough. You know, there are a number of wizards that already exist in the format or might be coming up that I just don't think are quite right for the deck. Like another one is Narumeha, Kamehameha right here. I think this is an awesome wizard, but it's not right for this deck. This is a control deck's wizard, and we are not really a control deck, even post boards when we put in counter spells. So even though this card looks supremely good to me in a lot of ways, I just don't think this is the deck for it. There's a bunch of other wizards like that too. So if I didn't bring it up, I just either don't think it's right for the deck or it's just not very good. So, but in any case, I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. That's how you brew up wizards with what we know now in Dominaria. But I'll get back to this deck when Dominaria Standard Proper comes out. If there's any changes that need to be made, I'll get to them again. But let me know how you felt about it down there in the comments section. Again, anything I missed, especially interactions I may have missed, let us know down there because it is brewing season and it's important that we all put our heads together on this one. And if you are interested in pre-ordering any of these lists, just click the first couple of links in the description. That'll take you over to my sponsor, TCG player to COG player. You can look at these lists at your leisure or pre-order them if you want to. Maybe you're speculating on them. You think some of these cards might go up in price before the set comes out. You can go ahead and pre-order them for the cheapest prices online over at COG player. Just click the links in the description. Helps out the channel when you do that. You can also like the video if you enjoyed it. I hope you did. I put a lot of work into all the videos you'll see over the next couple of weeks. I've been brewing like crazy, so like the video if you enjoy it and you think more people should see it. Hit the thumbs up button. Super low effort way to help out. You can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. Sub if you're new. Hit the bell for the notifications if you want more content like this. And if you really like content like this, you can toss me $1 of your hard-earned money every month. $1 a month over on patreon.com/SBMTG, and I'll let you know what decks are coming out the day before they come out, and you can take place in these awesome polls that help determine what decks come out before they come out. So do all that stuff, and I'm pretty sure that that's all I've got for this one. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.